"Hey, you useless rag, can't even clean the floor properly." The voice of the senior manager echoed through the entire office, making everyone turn toward Raul. Bending over with a mop, Raul froze. The manager continued mockingly, pointing at a wet spot on the floor. "What, dreaming of a promotion? Maybe you'd like to scrub my office next." A woman in a strict suit chimed in, barely holding back her laughter. The laughter bounced off the glass walls. Raul clenched his teeth, grabbed the mop, and silently resumed his work. He knew why he was there, and every humiliation brought him closer. Like the video and watch till the end. We're just getting started. The silence of the office was suddenly broken by a dull crack. It sounded like something heavy had fallen. Raul, now lounging in a leather chair with a glass of whiskey, turned sharply. On the marble floor lay a piece of broken glass. Beside it, the old portrait of his father. The painting had hung on that wall for as long as Raul could remember. Now, it lay in a mess of shards. He stood up heavily, stepping carefully toward the wreckage. His father, Don Alfonso, had always looked out from that portrait, as if he could see through everything. A slight smile, unshakable confidence. That painting had symbolized the company's greatness, its stability, its power, and now it was lying in the dirt. Raul picked up the frame, inspecting the cracks in the glass. Through them, his father's face looked blurred, distorted. "Well, Dad," Raul thought, "even your portrait couldn't take what I've become." A crooked smirk spread across his face. Raul had always been expected to do great things. First, the prestigious school, where he had to be the best. Then university, to become the rightful heir to the empire. And then, nothing. His father left too soon, leaving behind a billion-dollar business to a man who couldn't even remember the difference between a profit and loss report. Turns out, inheriting an empire is easier than finding the strength to run it. Placing the portrait on the desk, Raul pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and began carefully gathering the shards. "Well, I guess I'll have to hang this back up," he muttered, though he knew it could never be hung the same again. The cracks were too deep, the frame too damaged, like everything else around him. A sudden ding from his computer broke his thoughts. An incoming email. He waved it off. Probably just another report he wouldn't read. But something made him get up and walk over. The new email had no subject. The sender was anonymous. The message was short, but cut deep, like a knife. "If your father saw what his company has become, he would never forgive you. Everything he built over decades, you've turned to trash. Want the truth? Look into the eyes of the people who actually work here." Raul froze, rereading the message. His heart started to beat faster. It didn't feel like spam or a joke. The tone, the directness. Someone truly cared. His eyes returned to the portrait. Through the cracks, his father's gaze now seemed even harsher. "Well, Dad," he said, trying to keep his irony. "Looks like someone still thinks I can be redeemed." He took another sip of whiskey, but it now tasted bitter. like the thought that maybe they were right. Raoul set the glass down, stood tall, and looked out the window. The city spread before him, the same city his father had once conquered with wit and will. And now, it could forget his family name in a heartbeat if everything collapsed. "All right then," he said aloud, as if to the portrait. "Let's see what shape this empire is really in. Not from above, but from the bottom. If I owe you anything, it's at least that much." Raoul looked at the fractured portrait one last time and whispered, "See you soon, Dad. If I'm lucky, I'll come back a man you could be proud of." Later that night, Raoul sat in his apartment kitchen, studying an old leather notebook left behind by his father, worn and creased, but filled with notes his father had always cherished the most. At the top of one of the pages, written with underlined clarity, was a single phrase: "Never lose touch with the people who make your work possible." Raoul smirked as he closed the notebook. "Seems like I've lost touch not just with people, but with reality itself," he muttered. He had to do something, and whatever that something was, it demanded a radical approach. He picked up his phone and opened his contacts. There weren't many people he trusted anymore, but one of them was Diego, his father's former assistant, and perhaps the only person who still believed in the Suarez name. After a few rings, a confident voice answered. "Raoul? I didn't expect to hear from you. What's going on?" "Diego, I have an idea. I'm not sure if it's brilliant or insane. You'll probably know which." "Now you've got me interested," Diego chuckled. "Let's hear it." Raoul took a breath, gathering his thoughts. "I want to find out what's really going on in the company, not from reports and slides. I want to see it for myself." "You mean attend a board meeting?" Diego asked, confused. "No, Diego. I want to go undercover. As a janitor." A long pause filled the line. Raoul braced himself for sarcasm or laughter, but instead, Diego answered seriously. "Are you sure? I think it's the only way to truly understand how deep the rot goes. Reports lie, but people show their true faces only to those they consider invisible." Diego let out a soft laugh. "You really are your father's son. All right, let's figure out how to pull this off." 2 days later, Raoul stood at the back entrance of the company's main building. Gone was the expensive suit. Now he wore a simple gray jacket, faded jeans, and worn sneakers. He already felt out of place. The security guard at the door, used to visitors in tailored suits, gave him a look as if he had taken a wrong turn. Diego was waiting by the service entrance, holding a small cardboard box. Inside, a janitor's uniform, a blue jumpsuit, a name badge that read Manuel, and a pair of rubber gloves. "Here's your ticket into a whole new world," Diego said with a slight smile, handing him the box. Raoul examined the name tag. Manuel. It felt foreign, yet oddly fitting. "Manuel it is then," he murmured. "Let's hope I don't mess him up too much." Diego snorted. "You might make a lousy janitor, but as for your acting skills, we'll see. Just remember," he added seriously, "you're one of them now. No one can know who you really are. Raoul tried to appear more confident than he felt. You made sure no one in the office knows my face, right? Most employees have never seen you. Your photos popped up in a few internal memos. But who reads those? What matters more is this. People pay very close attention to those they consider beneath them. If you work too hard, they'll notice. Too lazy, same thing. Raoul chuckled. You sound like a director before a premiere. Maybe I am, Diego replied. But your premiere could end in disaster if you're not careful. He gave Raoul one final look and added, If anything goes wrong, call me. Raoul shook his hand. Thank you, Diego, for believing. Diego gave him a pat on the shoulder, then walked away, leaving Raoul alone by the door. Now, he was Manuel, and ahead of him lay a new, unfamiliar world. Anxiety wrestled with excitement, but one thought kept him steady. If he didn't try, he would forever remain the man who didn't even dare. Raoul, now Manuel, entered the towering office building through the service entrance. The marble floors gleamed, polished to perfection for appearance's sake. But the hallway itself felt cold, soulless. Whatever glory his father had once spoken of was now nothing more than empty words. His first trial was the stinging smell of chemicals in the janitor's closet, where the coordinator had directed him. There he received his tools, a mop bucket on wheels, a worn mop, and a handful of sponges. Welcome to the bottom of the hierarchy, he thought, pulling on the gloves. Armed with these instruments of humility, he stepped into the main corridor, just as the workday began. Men and women in designer suits rushed past him, not sparing so much as a glance. Waving their phones and folders, no one seemed to notice him, and in that, there was a strange kind of comfort. Hey, new guy! A loud voice cut through the hallway like a command. Raoul turned and saw a man in his 40s, round in the belly and sour in the face. His name tag read Alberto, Senior Logistics Manager. Alberto waved his hand like shooing away a fly. It's wet here. Did you spill water? Clean it up. Now. Raoul nodded silently and approached. He spotted a faint trail left by someone's damp shoes. Hurry up. This isn't a spa, Alberto added without waiting for a reply. Raoul crouched and wiped the floor, biting back a sarcastic response. Phrases like, "Did I make the puddle?" or "Your managerial aura is ruining the decor" whirled in his mind. But he reminded himself he was Manuel now, the silent janitor. As he stood back up, he caught Alberto speaking to a female colleague. "These new ones can't do anything right," he said with a glance at Raoul. "Good thing they're all temporary." Raoul turned away, his expression unreadable. The workday turned out to be a real trial. Those who didn't notice him ignored him entirely, and those who did notice felt free to bark orders or be openly rude. "Hey, you!" shouted a woman in a sharp gray suit. "You missed 3 tables in the conference room." But that wasn't the worst of it. Raoul started noticing whispers, side glances, stifled laughter, especially after he accidentally spilled a bit of water while mopping. Closer to lunchtime, things took a turn. He noticed odd details. Several offices, which, according to his father, were supposed to be occupied by key staff, stood empty. He slipped into one of them, pretending to throw out some trash. Inside were folders left wide open. A quick glance revealed figures in the reports that didn't match what he had seen in the official statements during his past attempts to review the company's finances. Rage flickered inside him. No wonder things are falling apart, he thought. Taking a moment to lean on his mop in the hallway, Raoul was approached by a young woman. Her face stood out immediately. Not proud, not arrogant. "You're new, right?" she asked. Raoul nodded. "Yeah, first day." "Tough place to be a janitor," she said, smiling faintly. "People here are a lot." Raoul studied her carefully. "You been here long?" "A month. I'm just an intern, working on a project, but no one really pays attention unless they want coffee." She chuckled. "So yeah, I get it." For the first time all day, Raoul smiled. Her honesty was disarming. It felt like something close to kindness. "Lucia," she said, offering her hand. "Manuel," Raoul replied, shaking it. By the time the workday ended, Raoul wasn't physically tired, but emotionally drained. He had witnessed how quickly people lost respect for those they saw as beneath them. This world was far removed from the ideals his father once spoke of. But he had also met Lucia, and her sincerity gave him a flicker of hope. Maybe not everything was lost. Tomorrow he planned to dig deeper, but today wasn't quite over. Office Fridays didn't end the way Raoul expected. Instead of heading home, employees began gathering in the large hall upstairs. Tables were being set with snacks and drinks, the scene buzzing with energy. A corporate party. Friday festivities, Raoul thought grimly, pushing his cleaning cart toward the corridor. "Hey, Manuel!" It was Alberto again. That voice was becoming a personal test of patience. Raoul turned, masking his irritation. "Yes? Someone spilled wine by the window. Clean it up before someone slips." "Of course," Raoul said curtly, and headed in that direction. The Friday atmosphere grew louder. Laughter, chatter, glasses clinking. The clinking of glasses, the hum of voices, all of it blended with the soft background music. Raoul, bent over the spilled wine, felt eyes begin to turn toward him. "Hey, Manuel!" someone shouted across the room. "Careful not to steal our wine glasses." A wave of laughter followed. Raoul said nothing. "He's probably dreaming of being one of us," another voice added. "Well, janitors are people too, I suppose," came a biting female voice. The laughter grew louder, but Raoul kept cleaning, boiling inside, yet knowing any reaction would only make things worse. "You're not here to argue," he reminded himself. As he stood up, lifting the bucket of dirty water, someone stuck out a foot. The bucket tipped, and water sloshed onto the floor, right next to a group of people. "And we still wonder why janitors are so unprofessional," Alberto said mockingly, pretending to be outraged. Raoul silently set the bucket down. He wanted to say something sharp, but instead he pressed his lips together and walked away. He stayed longer after the party, mopping the floor slowly, waiting for the office to empty out. But in the next room, 2 men remained. Their voices leaked through a half-open door. Raoul lingered nearby, listening. "Alvaro said the intercom contract is signed," said one voice. "That'll bring in another 5%. "Perfect," came the reply. "Have it routed through the same company in the Caymans." Raoul froze. Caymans? That already sounded illegal. As long as no one pokes around the paperwork, everything stays under a number that doesn't raise suspicion. You saw how smooth it worked last time. Sure, that old man Alfonso would have never approved. But lucky for us, he's gone. At the mention of his father, something inside Raoul clenched. The voices kept echoing in his head, feeding a rising storm of guilt and fury. When the room finally fell silent, Raoul slipped in. On the table, fresh folders, recently signed. He scanned them quickly. Figures, bank account addresses, offshore arrangements. It was clear. They were funneling money out of the company through tax havens. And the worst part? These were the very same documents his father once described, the backbone of financial integrity. Now, they had become tools of exploitation. Raoul took out his phone, snapping photos of every page, his hands steady, his heart anything but. On his way home, he couldn't shake what he'd heard. His father had always spoken of the company as a family, a place where each employee mattered, where honesty was the foundation. But this family had rotted. It had become a nest of greed. How long has this been going on? Who else is involved? He wondered, gripping his phone like a weapon. He couldn't believe he had been blind to this for years. And though the anger was mostly for the others, a part of it was turned inward. If I hadn't distanced myself, maybe none of this would have happened, he thought bitterly. But one thing was certain now. He had to uncover the full truth. Raoul looked down at his phone, at the images glowing on the screen. I'll deal with this, and if I have to break it all down to rebuild it right, so be it. After yet another tense day, Raoul sat alone in a small janitor's break room, the kind of space no one ever noticed. The evening was quiet, but the low murmur of voices in nearby offices reminded him that the machine never truly stopped. He thought about the documents, the people who had so easily discarded the principles his father had lived by. The door opened. Raoul expected another employee, asking for something to be cleaned or moved. But it was Lucia, the young intern he had met on his first day. In her hand was a paper cup of coffee. "Hi, Manuel," she said softly, her voice warm and sincere, as if she truly was glad to see him. "Hi, Lucia," Raoul replied, wiping his hands on his pants. She sat down beside him on an old metal chair and held out the cup. "I figured you must be exhausted. This helps." Raoul took the cup, surprised by her kindness. "Thanks." You stayed late today? He asked. Lucia nodded. Finishing up a project, but sometimes I feel like no one even notices I'm here. Why do you think that? He asked. She shrugged, giving a tired smile. I'm just an intern. People look at me like I'm a temporary inconvenience. Nobody cares why I'm here, why I chose this company. Raoul felt her words hit something deep. He knew that feeling, the slow disillusionment of seeing the cracks beneath the ideals. Why did you choose this company? He asked, voice low. Lucia looked up at him. When I was in university, one of our professors spoke about Mr. Suarez. She began hesitantly, as if unsure whether a janitor would know the story of the company's founder. I always felt this place wasn't just a business. It was a real family. Raoul looked at her, trying to hide how deeply her words struck him. Sounds like you were very inspired by that story, he said quietly. She nodded. Yes, I always dreamed of working in a company where people mattered just as much as profit. My mother was a janitor her whole life, and she always told me, whatever your job is, do it with pride. Her words echoed in Raoul's mind. He remembered how his father greeted everyone the same, from executives to cleaning staff, and thanked them for their contribution. But now, everything had changed. And how do you feel here? He asked cautiously. Lucia smiled, but there was a shadow of sadness in her eyes. It's not what I imagined. People have forgotten how to value one another. Sometimes it feels like the founders' ideals only live on in textbooks and lectures. Raoul nodded in silence. Her words hit home with a painful accuracy. But I still want to try, she added. Maybe if I prove myself, something will change. After she left, Raoul remained seated in the quiet, reflecting on her words. Her belief in the company and in his father's legacy had lit something in him. The next day, Raoul started noticing other employees like Lucia, people who stayed late, not for praise, but because they believed in doing things right. Those who smiled at security guards, who thanked janitors, who expected nothing in return. They were like small islands of light in a sea of apathy. And they reminded Raoul of something his father once told him. There will always be those who believe in a better future. Is people like Lucia still believed in his father's company? Then maybe all hope wasn't lost. But could he live up to their faith? The office day was coming to an end. Most employees had already left. But one office on the top floor remained lit. It was that office, the one that had, since Raoul's father's death, become the true face of the company. Raoul stood in the hallway, leaning against the wall, mop and bucket in hand, pretending to wait for instructions. But in truth, he was listening. Voices slipped through the slightly open door. Alvaro sat behind the massive desk. Across from him were two men in expensive suits. Documents and tablets lay on the table, around which they were hunched like conspirators. If we move the money through Marin trade, we'll cut tax costs by 30%, one of the men said, pointing at the tablet screen. 30%? Alvaro narrowed his eyes. That's too obvious. We need to keep it closer to 20. No red flags. Raul froze. Their words were the stuff of corruption, schemes he'd only heard about in crime films. Just make sure none of it traces back to us, Alvaro continued, lighting a cigar. You know any questions will land on whoever signs the papers. We've covered everything, one of the men assured. The company's registered in Panama. There'll be fewer traces than you have hair. The three burst into laughter. Rage mingled with pain in Raul's chest. Alvaro had been one of his father's most trusted allies. The man everyone relied on. His father once called him his right hand. And now, this same man sat in the office where dreams for the future were once drawn up, planning how to cheat the system. Raul gripped the mop tightly, as if it could become a weapon to end this betrayal right now. But no, he needed more proof. The conversation grew bolder. And the minority shareholders? Asked one of the men. They won't notice the losses. Alvaro waved his hand dismissively. As long as they get their dividends, they don't care what's going on inside. A cold sweat slid down Raul's back. It was a direct insult to everything his father had believed in. Don Alfonso had always said, a company thrives on trust, from clients and shareholders alike. Now that trust had been twisted into a tool for greed. And the Suarez family? The second man asked. Alvaro laughed, leaning back in his chair. The Suarez family? They're long gone. That boy, Raul, he doesn't even know what's happening here. He's too busy with clubs and yachts. The laughter echoed like a slap. Raul felt the anger rise again. Alvaro's words bounced around his head like a curse. The years he had spent away from the company, detached, had given men like Alvaro a chance to seize control. But now that the truth was in front of him, he couldn't ignore it. I let this happen, Raul thought, clenching his fists. He blamed himself for looking the other way, for not being the leader his father had been. But along with the guilt came something else. Resolve. If he didn't act now, the company his father built would become a monument to lies and betrayal. When the meeting ended and the two men left, Raul saw Alvaro remain alone with the documents. He entered the adjacent room under the pretense of cleaning, and through the half-open door, watched Alvaro sign the papers they had just discussed. His face showed smug certainty, convinced of his impunity. Raul took several discreet photos with his phone, heart pounding. As he left the office, a storm raged within him. He knew exposing Alvaro wouldn't be easy. The man was too powerful. The evidence Raul had wasn't enough to destroy him, yet. But one thing was certain. He would stay silent no longer. I turned a blind eye for too long. Now it's my turn to speak, he thought. The night air outside was cold, but Raul's chest burned with fire. The next morning, as soon as he stepped into the office, he sensed it. Something had shifted. The looks from others, once indifferent or mocking, had changed. There was something cautious in their eyes, watchful. He grabbed his mop bucket and began his usual route. But the fear of being discovered gnawed at him. That evening, he sent the photos to his only ally, Diego, asking him to keep them safe and start drafting a plan. It was his only hope. By midday, Raul overheard his name in a conversation between two managers. "Alvaro's asking about that new janitor," said one. "Yeah, word is he's not what he seems. He was seen yesterday near the office where the contracts were being discussed." A chill ran through Raul's spine. Alvaro was starting to suspect something. But Raul couldn't just disappear. Not now. That would be far too obvious. And lunchtime was still to come. Wait. End. When Raul was summoned to the executive office, under the pretense that something needed urgent cleaning, he knew something was off. As he stepped inside, he saw not only Alvaro, but also several other employees. Among them, the very same men he had seen during the secret meeting. "Ah, our new recruit, Manuel," Alvaro said with a false smile, stretching out his words like venom. "How are you enjoying the job? Everything all right?" "Yes, thank you," Raul answered curtly, trying to sound composed. "Wonderful," Alvaro said, taking a few steps closer. "You see, we seem to have misplaced some important documents. You haven't seen anything suspicious, have you?" A cold shiver ran down Raul's spine. "They're trying to pin this on me," he realized. "No, nothing like that," he replied. Alvaro nodded, but there was something dangerous in his gaze, a tension that was impossible to ignore. "Really? Then perhaps you can explain this." He pulled out a copy of the very document Raul had photographed the night before. "Because I have reason to believe you're involved." Raul froze. His heart pounded in his chest. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, but his voice betrayed him, trembling. "You don't?" Alvaro raised his voice and slammed the document on the table. "Then maybe you'd prefer to say that in front of everyone here." He gestured toward the other employees. Then, like a predator circling its prey, Alvaro slowly walked around Raul. "We've suspected for a while now that someone's been leaking information," he continued. "But who would have thought it was the janitor?" All eyes were fixed on Raul. Some were curious, others smug. "You understand we could call the police?" Alvaro asked, stopping directly in front of him. Raul summoned every ounce of courage within him and raised his gaze. "The police? Why? So they can take a look at your clean contracts?" The room went still. His voice had come out louder than expected. "What did you just say?" Alvaro hissed, his face reddening with fury. "I said, I know what's happening in this company. Your schemes, your offshore deals, all of it. A betrayal of everything my father built." The room held its breath. The other employees glanced at one another, uncertain. "You think anyone here cares what you say?" Alvaro growled. "These people saw you cleaning trash bins. You're a pathetic boy who showed up after years of absence. Who are you to speak of morals?" Raul clenched his fists, but forced himself to stay calm. "I'm the one who will restore this company's dignity." Alvaro stepped closer, his face twisted with rage. "Try it, but don't forget, I have more power than you can imagine." Raul was then escorted out of the office, amidst mocking laughter and sarcastic whispers. He felt humiliated, but inside, something was burning. Now he knew for certain The truth was on his side. As he exited the building, he saw Lucia. Her eyes were filled with concern. "Manuel, what happened?" He paused, looked at her, and calmly replied, "This is just the beginning." Raul's steps felt heavier, but his resolve had never been stronger. He had lost his anonymity, but he had gained a purpose: to take the company back and prove that the Suarez name still meant something. That night, Raul sat in an old chair in his apartment, holding his father's worn leather notebook. On one of the first pages, in elegant handwriting, were the words, "Your responsibility is not just to own, but to lead by example." Those words had once been his guiding star as a child. Over time, their meaning had faded like an inscription weathered by the years. But now, reading them again, something stirred deep within him. A new fire was rising in his chest. This wasn't just a matter of honor. It was a matter of legacy, of his father's life, the company's soul, and the people who still believed in what it once stood for. Raul closed the notebook and rose to his feet. In the window's reflection, he saw his own face, tired but resolute. He could no longer remain hidden. The next morning, Raul returned to the office, but not through the service entrance. This time, he walked through the front door, where the company's name still shone in gold. The emblem of the company, his father's pride, shone above the main entrance. People who were used to seeing him as a janitor stopped in their tracks, stunned by his unexpected appearance. He walked toward Alvaro's office with a confidence he had long searched for within himself. Minutes later, he stood in front of the man who had recently tried to destroy him. "Raul Suarez," Alvaro uttered, forcing a smile to mask his surprise. "What are you doing here?" Raul looked him straight in the eye. "I'm here to take back what belongs to me and my family." An hour later, the main conference room was filled with the company's key employees. Raul stood at the central table, scanning the faces of those gathered. He could feel their tension, confusion, and even fear. "For those who don't know," he began, his voice clear and steady, "I am Raul Suarez, son of Don Alfonso Suarez, the founder of this company." There were whispers in the room. Those who once saw him as just the janitor exchanged glances. "What I've seen happening here," he continued, "has nothing to do with the values my father instilled in this place." Alvaro, seated at the far end of the table, leaned forward. "And what do you plan to do about it?" he asked, clearly trying to undermine Raul's authority. Raul paused, meeting the gaze of everyone in the room. "I plan to change everything." He placed photographs and documents on the table, evidence he had gathered during his time working at the company. "These are proof of the money being funneled through offshore accounts. These are the deals that have undermined not only this company's reputation, but its future." Alvaro stood, attempting to appear calm. "You're accusing me without proof. This is slander." "It's the truth," a voice interrupted. Lucia stood at the back of the room, her voice unwavering. "I saw him forging documents." Her statement was an unexpected turn. Raul knew her words might cost her job, but she had made her choice. Raul stepped toward the screen, where a project plan was already displayed. "This is what we're going to do," he said, switching slides. "First, we're voiding all illegal contracts and cutting ties with those involved in the fraud. Second, we're restructuring the company, starting with the dismissal of—" He turned. "You, Alvaro, your authority ends now." The room fell silent. Alvaro tried to protest, but Raúl didn't give him the chance. "Security has already been notified. You may collect your things." Two guards entered and stood beside Alvaro, who stared daggers at Raúl. Raúl continued, "Tonight, we start rebuilding this company's reputation. That means more than fixing mistakes. It means becoming a place people want to work at again." As the meeting ended, Raúl stayed behind, watching people file out. Their faces reflected a mix of fear, doubt, and maybe a glimmer of hope. Lucia walked up to him. "That was brave," she said. "But are you sure you can do this?" Raúl smiled. For the first time in a long while, he felt sure of himself. "No, but I know I can't keep doing nothing." He stepped out of the building and looked up at the company's logo, glowing in the setting sun. He knew the road before him would be long and hard, but for the first time, he felt like he was doing what he was born to do. "Father, I won't fail you again," he thought, clutching the leather notebook he now carried everywhere. For the first time in years, the office felt like it truly belonged to him. The massive oak desk, the bookshelves, the worn leather chair, all remained just as his father had left them. On the desk lay the same tattered notebook that had guided his first steps, but beside it now rested a folder, his reform plan. Over the past days, Raúl had identified the employees who still held on to his father's values. Among them was Lucia, whose presence now felt anything but unexpected. Raúl insisted that she be part of the team, even though it surprised the others. "We're starting with a clean slate," Raúl began, looking around at those gathered. "I know this company lost its soul over the past few years, but I'm here to bring it back." He looked at the people in the room. Some of them he was seeing for the first time, but from their eyes, he could tell they were willing to believe in him if he showed them he believed in it himself. "First, we're going to review all existing contracts, especially those signed under Alvaro. Lucia is already helping me compile a list of suspicious deals." Lucia nodded slightly, a little embarrassed by the attention, but confident in her role. "Second, we won't just restore the company's reputation. We'll create an environment where every employee matters. That was my father's core principle, and it will become the foundation of our work." His words were met with approving murmurs. Alvaro's dismissal had been swift, but painful for the company. Over the years, he had built a web of influence that spread far and deep. But with evidence in hand, Raúl had severed ties with the man who had tarnished his family's name. Alvaro left in silence, but the hate in his eyes spoke louder than any words. Raúl knew this wasn't the end. People like Alvaro always found ways to come back. But this time, he was ready. Once Alvaro's office was cleared, Raúl had some of his belongings brought over from his apartment. Among them was the portrait of his father that had broken on the day all of this began. He carefully took it out of the box. The frame had been replaced and the glass polished, a reminder that no restoration could ever truly return what was lost. He stared at the portrait for a long time, remembering his father's face, his confidence and resolve. Then he turned to his assistants. "Please, hang this on the wall." When the portrait was in place, Raoul walked over to the bookshelf and pulled out something else. A photograph taken just that morning. In it was the team that had stayed by his side, despite the chaos. "Hang this beside it," he said, handing the photo to Lucia. She smiled and stepped toward the wall, gently placing the picture next to the portrait. "I think he'd be proud," she said quietly, taking a step back. The week had been intense, but it yielded early results. The cancellation of suspicious contracts, the beginning of talks with honest partners, and the first steps of a new way of working. Some employees had left. Others, on the contrary, were inspired by the changes. Most importantly, Raoul began to notice that people in the office had started to smile again. Simple greetings like "Good morning" were once again spoken sincerely. People began to connect with one another. Late at night, when most employees had gone home, Raoul met Lucia again in the corridor. "You don't seem to take breaks," he joked. She smiled, rubbing her tired shoulders. "And you've been here every day, from dawn to dusk." Raoul chuckled. "I think this is my home now." She looked at him seriously. "Can you really change all this?" she asked. Raoul paused, considering her question. "No," he answered honestly. "I can't change everything, but I can start." She nodded, a glimmer of confidence in her eyes. "That's more than anyone before you did." That evening, sitting at his desk, Raoul opened his father's notebook once more. On the last page, there was a short but powerful sentence: "Everything begins with one person." He closed the notebook and looked up at the wall. Now, there were two images there, a reminder of the past and a vision for the future. His father, standing at the foundation of the company, and the new team, ready to rebuild it. Raoul smiled at the portrait of his father. "Dad, this is just the beginning." Raoul stood at the window of his office, watching the city slowly drown in the lights of the evening sky. The fading sunlight reflected on the glass facades of the buildings, reminding him of the ambition and dreams once woven into the heart of this company. He felt a strange blend of peace and unease press against his chest. Behind him, on the wall, hung two symbols of his journey: his father's portrait and the photo of the new team. Every time Raoul looked at them, he saw two sides of the same coin: a past he could never escape, and a future he now fully owned. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. It was Lucia, holding a thick stack of papers, looking like she had long since crossed the threshold of exhaustion. "These are the contract documents you asked me to review," she said, placing them on the desk. Raoul nodded as he accepted the folder. "Are you sure you can keep up this pace?" She smiled, shrugging slightly. I think we both know the answer to that. Raoul smiled back. Her resilience was a reminder to him that everyone here was on their own path, filled with doubts and effort. When she left, he glanced at the papers again. They were another small detail in the vast tapestry of change he was weaving. And yet, each small detail reminded him of one thing: change begins with the smallest step.